Hello and welcome back to Deeper. Here we go again with another series of deeper videos using the passages that we look at on Sunday and go and get a little bit deeper with them. And it is an absolute delight to have our curate Bec here with us today. Hi, Bec.
Hi, it's really good to be back doing deeper, looking really deeply into this passage that we've been thinking about.
We've had a longer break than we expected, didn't we? You know, because we said probably be around about mid-September, but the whole kind of 200th anniversary thing got in the way, and then I was on holiday, and then I was on holiday again. So yeah, it's been a longer break than we expected, but here we are. And so we're looking at a new sermon. Well, we started a new sermon series a few weeks ago. Tell you what, Bec, why don't you? I'll spring this on you. Tell people about the sermon series, and then tell them about what you spoke about on Sunday.
Okay, so we have been looking at the Psalms of Ascent, which is Psalms 120 to 134, and they are a collection of psalms actually that are held together. In even the earliest manuscripts, these psalms are in this sort of configuration in together. And they are the songs that God's people sing as they ascend the road up to Jerusalem for the major festivals for which they make that pilgrimage into the city. And so they sort of express something of God's people's expectations and concerns as they come together to worship.
You've done your research, haven't you?
I have, checked me
well
out.
So what was Sunday about?
So this Sunday, it was our harvest service, and we looked at Psalm 128 and thought a bit about what does it look like for us to be blessed and for us to be a blessing in that. So how do we make space for other people to connect and be blessed in that context? And it talks a lot about family, and we talked a bit about what it means to be family and community and how God intends us to live as families.
Very good. I haven't watched it yet because I was at another church, so I need to catch up with the online service and see what Bec said. So anyway, let's get on with this. So we're going to go through it verse by verse like we always do, and then look at some application points and then some further questions for you all. So let's start off with verse 1. Why don't you go first, Bec? Blessed are all who fear the Lord and walk in his ways. What stands out for you here?
So my translation says happiness. Happy is everyone who fears the Lord. And what I note here is that in this very first verse, happiness comes from fearing the Lord. So it goes on to pull out all of these things that might be sources of happiness to us. But the very first verse sets out that fearing the Lord and living in that relationship with God is what brings happiness to our lives.
Yeah. And different versions may have different things. There's different versions may say blessed, mightn't they?
They might, yeah. Quite a lot will, in fact.
Yeah, a lot will. But it actually is much more about happiness, which I think is really interesting, which we might pick up on later. Fearing the Lord. What do we make of that? Because that whole idea of fearing God was downplayed a lot over the last 50 or 60 years. And I'm 60, so I kind of know, you know. How do we feel?
Right. This grand old age, and you remember.
I remember, yeah. So what does it mean for us to fear God? What would your thoughts be?
So I think this language of fearing God can be really difficult for us to sort of get our heads around, can't it? Because we talk a lot about, you know, God loves us and he cares about us, and we want to have a relationship with God that makes us relate to him in a way that is accessible, and we want to bring other people into an accessible relationship with God. But also it's really useful for us sometimes to step back and remember God is holy and awesome and mighty, and actually having this sort of healthy understanding of who God is will lead us to both fear God and love God, to sort of have a healthy respect for who God is and what he's done.
Absolutely. And it is quite a strong word here that's used in the Hebrew. It is definitely, be afraid. When you think of who God is and what he's able to do and how insignificant we are, yeah, we would be. If we were stood in front of a tiger, we'd all be terrified. And yet here we are with the God who made the tiger. It's like, yeah, we need to probably almost rediscover what it means to fear God again. But there's two parts to this verse, isn't it? We're to fear God, which is one part, and the second part is to walk in his ways, which is all about how we focus our lives around him. And the two should go hand in hand, shouldn't it? Really.
That's it. And so one of the things I did on Sunday was to take us back a bit into Deuteronomy and think about the rules that God laid out for his people and how they were to live in a way that was pleasing to God, and how they were to establish themselves as a nation that was focused on justice and on kind of providing for those who would be vulnerable and needy, who maybe in the surrounding cultures would have been exploited or left destitute.
Yeah. And when you think about, the law, it covers every part of life. And so, walking in the ways of God isn't simply about, well, I pray sometimes and I read my Bible a bit. It is how do you shape the whole of your life around God? I mean, in the law, it has all sorts of things about how you wash your hands and all that kind of stuff. There's every detail of life can be focused around God. And we stick them in a little box that's stuck on a Sunday morning for an hour or so. And so those who fear God shape the whole of their lives around him, not just a bit, not just an hour on Sunday, but every aspect of their life around him. So let's move on to verse 2. You will eat the fruit of your labor, blessings and prosperity will be yours. What do you want to say about that?
So it strikes me that you will eat the fruits of your labor. Your work will be fulfilling. Your work will be part of that blessing. Part of what brings you fulfillment in life will be the things that you do, because it will be fruitful and it will be worthwhile. And just that as we sort of think about how we shape the whole of our lives towards God, that part of that is what we do with the rest of our week, what we do with the rest of our time in our work, and that we are fruitful and fulfilled in all of that. Yeah.
And it kind of reminds me of that whole kind of, in the end, you reap what you sow. And if you're shaping the whole of your life around God and making sure that, you're doing your best to shape that life, then you will reap the consequences of that, which should be blessings and health and prosperity. And if you don't, then that also has consequences. So for me, there's that kind of sense of you will reap what you sow here, the fruits of your labor. And it is sometimes hard work, isn't it, to shape your life around God, because it takes us out of our comfort zones, and it takes us out of our personal preferences. And then the psalmist goes on to verse 3, which is really, I think it gets really interesting here. Let me just read it. Your wife will be like a fruitful vine within your house. Your sons will be like olive shoots around your table. Off you go.
So I got a really good chuckle on Sunday. You missed it, for saying that sometimes our children seem less like, olive shoots and more like sort of grumpy sacks of hormones. And does that mean that we're not blessed by God when family life isn't perfect? Because we all know that even in the most wonderful family, there are days where family life isn't perfect. And so this sort of image is a challenge to us, isn't it? To think about, what does God's blessing really look like? It might partly be this, but if we read the psalm as a whole, we see that it's in every area of life, not just this one. We sort of get a bit obsessed with this sometimes in church.
Yeah, we do. And I guess particularly in a place like America, where there's such a huge focus on family within church life. And yet family here is can be quite different, can't it? You know, it's family can be much more than just man, woman, children. So here it's more about kind of discovering something of the purpose of God for those who are closest to you. Is this, let me ask you a question, and then is this, do you think, a promise from God that if you walk in his ways, then you'll have a thriving family life? Or is it something else?
No, I don't think that is God's promise. I think for me, what this says to me is you will be able to live in a unit of people who and be loved and love and offer and share that life and work together, so that the fullness of God's blessing is in shaping your life around God's law, is in working and being fruitful, and in sharing your life with others. And that doesn't necessarily have to look like marriage and children.
Yeah, no. I think it's Charles Spurgeon wrote a bit about this, and so he's writing what was 100 years ago, something like that. That his comment on it, you know, good wives should also be fruitful in kindness and helpfulness and affection. It's not just about having kids; it's about the whole thing. You know, the fruitfulness of life is not just about having kids. It's about how you live a life in such a way that it is beneficial to others. Which, you know, considering his context and how long ago it was, I thought it was quite an insightful comment, really. The interesting thing about olive trees is they do take a long time to mature and to actually become profitable. Which is, that's kids, isn't it? You know, for 18 or more years, they suck the life out of you. And then maybe, if you're lucky, they start to kind of give you something back. So that I think it's quite an inspired choice of words to describe them as little olive sprouts or something, yeah, because, yeah, it takes a long time for them to mature. So I think I would agree with it. I don't think these are kind of promises for everyone. I think these are ideals. These are hopes of the psalmist, that, you know, and probably hopes of most people, you know, that they would have in some way a family life that is flourishing and thriving. But they are not the only blessings of walking with God, are they? You know, God blesses us in so many other ways, in terms of his provision, the resources he gives us, the purpose he gives us, prosperity, all those kind of things. His blessings are far more numerous than simply family life.
And equally, family life can be an incredible blessing, but it can be in every direction, can't it? It can be that being a child is an incredible blessing, being a brother or a sister, or we're all connected in some way. And if we're all living those kinds of fruitful lives, then living in a community of whatever size that lives that way is a blessing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, in lots of ways, our missional communities are in some way intended to be kind of family-like. And for some people may well be the closest thing to family they'll get, because their own family is so dysfunctional or so just chaotic that they need another group of people to provide stability and a sense of security and affirmation. Let's move on to verse 4, which is basically almost like a repeat of verse 1. Which to me means he's just saying, look, this is important. So repetition in Hebrew thinking is always about adding a level of importance to it. The more it gets repeated, the more important it is. So, you know, it is about your blessing comes from fearing God, and it's important to us. Then verse 5 makes a bit of a shift, doesn't it?
It does. So as we come to verse 5, the Lord bless you from Zion, may you see the prosperity of Jerusalem all the days of your life. We sort of move from a picture of personal blessing or a family community blessing to a sort of more national picture, a big picture of God blessing them as a nation. perhaps as you're sort of starting to get to the point where there's really lots of people on this road now, and an awareness of that this is all of us, God's blessing all of it. I'm part of this bigger group of people who fear the Lord, who are coming on this pilgrimage as a response to God's instruction of how we should live.
Yeah. And you start to kind of paint a picture there of that kind of a family, leaving home to go to Jerusalem, and on the road, more and more families joining them. And so it feels like we're a whole nation going towards Jerusalem now. It would be a real sense of we belong to something bigger. And I think, for all of us, one of the dangers is family becomes everything. Our own little secure family becomes everything to us, when that's not how the Bible intends it at all.
No.
We are meant to be part of something bigger. That's why we've got the church. That's why we're here in our church. We have mission communities. So, yeah. And of course, the Hebrew word for blessing changes here. It's now the much more normal word, which is baruch, which is all about kind of blessing from God. The initial word was more kind of blessing that we achieve out of the consequences of our actions. This is what God will do for us. And it is about the community, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then verse 6 finishes off with, well, basically saying you'll live a long life. And then peace be on Israel, which no one knows what these songs sounded like, but I guess that was a bit of almost like a shout. The whole kind of, people of God there just saying, yeah, peace be on Israel. It feels like that when you read through it, is this kind of going from the smaller to the bigger, and then, let's pray for peace on Israel. Anything you want to say on verse 6?
Just that, as well as the idea of, we're sort of building into this bigger thing, that God's blessing flows out into a bigger audience, doesn't it? We start to think about future generations and wider communities, and this sort of ongoing sense of God's blessing, bigger than just where we started with, like, you will be blessed.
Yeah. Right, let's just think about how this goes a little bit wide and its application. So where should we start with that? What do you want to start with application?
So on Sunday, I spoke about how important it is that as we're blessed as individuals, that we start to have this bigger perspective, and that our homes and our church is a place where people can connect and experience something of God's goodness and provision and blessing. And so I suppose application-wise, for me, I'd love people to be thinking about how do we need to be. I think what you said earlier about it's easy for us to fall into our safe spaces, our family or our missional community, where we're comfortable and with people who we know well, but how could we be opening up opportunities for others, for God's blessing to flow through us?
Yeah, that's good. I think point that I would make is I just think it's fascinating that the whole verse or psalm starts with happy are those, and we quite often dismiss happiness as Christians. We talk about joy, and it's a deep joy and it comes from within and all that kind of stuff, and happiness definitely comes as more of an external thing rather than joy being an internal thing, but your happiness does matter to God. And we need to keep remembering that God does want our happy people, and having the right kind of people around us who will encourage us and support us. Hopefully that's your family. It might not be, but if it isn't, then find a group of people who will effectively become your family and help you find that sense of happiness. It's not simply a matter of mum and dad and kids, because the Bible recognizes, doesn't it, that life isn't simple. Here, if you looked at this psalm on its own, you would think, right, the righteous are always happy and prosper. That's what you would think if you read that psalm. But there's a whole bunch of other psalms like, oh, why is it the righteous don't prosper and the evil people do? It's like the whole of the psalms recognize some complexity in life. Is there any other application points that you want to draw out?
Well, I suppose looking at verse 2, thinking about you'll enjoy the fruit of your labour and you'll enjoy your work, just maybe taking the opportunity to thank God for the things that he gives us to do, or to ask God, what is the thing that you've got for me to be doing? What should my life be taken up with? That's going to be fruitful and bring me happiness and be a blessing to me, because that's God's intention for us. That's a huge proportion of how we spend our week, and it should be something that points us to God's goodness, in at least the way that we find it fruitful or enjoyable.
Absolutely, yeah, it's a good point. I think the final thing I want to talk about as an application is to get people to think about, how do I fear God? Do I fear God even? Because we get so cozy up with God, don't we? We know we describe him as, he's the one who loves us, he's our friend, and all that kind of stuff. And he is all of those things. And he is also awesome and holy and majestic and mighty and all that. How do you bring in something of the fear of God again into your life? Because it's emphasized in this psalm, comes up a couple of times. Where is that sense of honor and respect and awe that fear would bring? Is it something that you need to bring back into your worship a little bit, or into your prayer time? I would encourage people to think about that, I think, because it was certainly a challenge for me as I kind of reflected on this psalm. Anyway, should we give people some questions to think about as we go a little bit further?
Yes, let's think about some questions.
So then, Bec, I'll let you go first. Have you got a question for people to reflect on?
Yes, so I would love you to have a think about what Bible passages can you think of that maybe inspire or express something about fearing God, that maybe tell us a bit of a description of God that might lead us to fear him, or something about how God's people have interacted with him that might sort of give them that holy sense of fear and understanding of God's greatness and holiness.
Very good. Okay. I'll go next then. Let's go with this. How are individual blessings connected to kind of community or national blessing? Because we see that progression in the psalm from the individual and family to the national. What's the connection? Just to get people to think about that.
Good
one. Do I need to go next?
So does God reward us in this life? Do we receive blessings from God that are sort of material things that make us happy, or is that something that we just work for?
Okay, great. And then final question then. It's connected to the one I gave before, really, but I'll say it. Do happy, godly families automatically lead to righteous nations? It's a bit of a deep philosophical one, that one. So, does it automatically lead?
You might want to go and make another cup of coffee before you get onto that question.
Yeah, you might do. Yeah. It's all right, fantastic. Do please consider those questions either on your own, but preferably within missional communities. We'd love you to join one if you're not in one, and we can give you information if you get in touch with the office, and the information will be at the end of this video. Bec, thank you for chatting with me today. Great as always. So until next week, we'll see you then. Take care. Bye.
See you. Bye.